Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Comics Della Morte. Hopefully, the signal will fix itself because we had some minor delay before we went live. But we have a new guest on the show, Caleb Palmquist. Is that how you pronounce the
Yep.
last name?
Right.
Don't want to butcher it.
You got it.
All right. And talk about Dragon Grit. Before we get into
That's
Dragon Grit, I just want to ask, you know, what was the first time you really fell in love with comics in the beginning, and what comic, if you remember, was it?
I will say that as a kid, I really liked newspaper comics. So my favorite one definitely was Calvin and Hobbes. But then, um, as I got a little bit older, the first real comic books that I
Mhm.
fell in love with was X-Men comics. And I just kind of
Yeah.
had random issues, right? Like that I got at the mall, and like they would have these like little grab bags, of like three random issues or whatever. And then so I had, some
Yeah.
Claremont, and then I also had just like random issues of like Ultimate X-Men that I just like read a million times as a kid. Um and then and the first comic that made me think that I could write comics myself was Brian K. Vaughan's Why the Last Man. Um which was just
Yeah.
something, yeah, that really inspired me.
Awesome. Yeah, even with me, the first time like I even bought like my first comic wasn't even at a comic book store. It was at a 7-Eleven. Or no, not a 7-Eleven, a Quick Trip, for anybody that's from the Midwest. So,
Oh man, that's funny.
yeah. So exactly when you started to then want to write or even work in comics, did you feel that, oh, I want to give drawing and writing, or is it just the writing that you wanted to mostly do?
Yeah, mostly writing. I mean, I sometimes draw for fun, but definitely the comics that I publish are drawn by more talented people. So, I I always enjoyed drawing, and I used to do a lot of
Mhm.
animation when I was a kid. Um, but I definitely feel that my skill set is more in the writing. Uh,
Yeah, I gotcha. Now with the writing and everything, at first, a lot of us were like, "Oh, I could write a comic," and then you really sit down and realize that, "Oh, I'm adding too much dialogue in such a small panel." Like, did you have that problem at first, or was it more like easy flow with you?
Um, I'm a big fan of decompressed storytelling in comics, and so I think probably early on, I kind of figured out. I kind of cut my teeth on some comics that didn't do very well, and but I have definitely gone in the opposite direction. I am a big fan of less is more. I try to have the smallest amount of dialogue that I can. Every once in a while I have a page that has
Gotcha.
a lot of dialogue, but for the most part, if you look at the preview pages on my current Kickstarter, there's like hardly any words. That's just how I really like to write.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's always, as I always say it, if you could find a way to have the artist create your passion on a page without having as much dialogue and just have the artwork tell the story, then you're winning people right there. Of course, it's important to know what's going on in the story, but especially like I think you dove in other work, but like especially a horror franchise, you don't need dialogue with everything. So, and even action pace, it's always important to try to find a fine balance between everything.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Now, with what would now when you started for writing the comics and everything, like how many are you up to date on how many you created? Because I haven't gotten a chance to look at it.
How many have I created? Well, I can tell you that I've done over
Yeah,
20 Kickstarters. Um,
awesome,
and
congrats.
yeah, thank you. I want to say if you're talking issues, let's see, probably close to 20 also. Um, some of those Kickstarters were for graphic novels or, trade paperbacks. But yeah, I've done quite a few. I have
Yeah,
4 or 5 series that I'm doing. And so, definitely got like quite a few different projects.
Awesome. Now with, the Kickstarters and everything, like, do you feel it's gotten easier or you have more deadlines coming out? Because I've seen that you backed a lot of stuff and you did everything. Like, at this point in your Kickstarter, you're up to 20. Do you feel more confident to add more tiers, or you try to keep it as simple as possible?
That's a good question. I do try to keep my tiers simple, uh, but I definitely have people can add on a lot of stuff that I've done before.
Yeah,
um and so I feel that it's in many ways it's gotten easier, but I have made the mistake a few times in my Kickstarter career of kind of resting on my laurels and being like, well,
mhm,
I succeeded before, I'll succeed again. So I don't
yeah,
really need to go to any special effort, but that's always a mistake. Everyone is a new one, but I would say it's gotten easier in the sense that I know what I'm doing now, and I know,
yeah.
like, I kind of know the major steps that I need to do, and there's a lot less uncertainty.
Yeah, because I know I've had friends on the show, people on the show that I'm friends with now, with their comics, they've had custom pop figures, they've had plushies, they've had like things printed off through 3D printers. And it's like, that's great and everything, but that's a lot of money too to have that stuff custom made. So
Oh yeah,
sometimes it's best just to keep it simple with just the artwork. But I mean, if you want to do that like one tier where like, okay, there's only like 10 of these, and if they run out, they run out. We're not gonna make more because I even have a friend, I think, with her comic, she was like a special tier you could get hot sauce. So, yeah, sometimes unless you have the time and the effort, I think that you shouldn't have so many tiers because it's just gonna overthrow everything, especially if you gotta remember, okay, this person gets hot sauce, this person gets the comic, and what else do they all get after they pledge this? So, yeah, it could be very tedious.
I did a few years ago. I did a figurine, and I don't have one sitting right next to me, but I paid a 3D artist to create my unicorn figurine, and then
Which
I
I did see that, that was nice work
yeah, it was very
from what I
cool. And
read
then I
from the
had
plot, and then the artist
yeah.
did a great job too.
Oh, on Unicorn Vampire Hunter, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so I had these 3D figures made, and then they were shipped to me, and they almost all got broken in transit. In Because the post office like really mangled the boxes, and I ended up refunding all the backers rather than trying to like have them printed again. Like basically,
Oh, wow.
and so I wouldn't say I would never do something like that again, but I think if I did, basically I would essentially hire, instead of like trying to do it myself, I would hire like a company that specializes in that and have them do the fulfillment. Um,
Yeah,
because then if they do get broken or whatever, then there's like they could replace them or whatever. Like I wouldn't be on the hook for that. So
yeah.
basically, I don't do any rewards that can't be flat packed with the book. Um,
Mhm.
and that's that. It's like you said, it's just like a real pain. People do T-shirts and plushies, and I don't think it's worth it. I mean, maybe I'd make more money doing that, but I just don't think it's worth the effort and the potential for things to get messed up. So
Well, of
yeah.
course, I mean, people I mean, in the past, I tried to do t-shirt companies and stuff like that, and people are like, "Well, why is, the extra large gonna cost more money than a small?" I'm like, "Because it's more material. Just because it's
Hmm.
all the same price at at a Walmart or something, you go somewhere else, you're gonna pay more money for a bigger size shirt, because it's
Yeah,
not made in
yeah.
bulk."
Um,
So,
yeah. So, but also the other thing is I'm a comic book writer. I'm not a T-shirt
yeah,
maker or a plush
exactly.
designer. So I'm like, it's comics. That's what you get. If you come to my Kickstarter, you're gonna get comics. Maybe you'll get
Exactly.
some art prints, but yep.
Awesome. Now, your comic really piqued my interest because, I don't know, the reach out, but we do mostly horror and fantasy on here, and I really love the idea of the story here, Dragon Grit. Tell anybody who hasn't like read the description that I have in the video what exactly Dragon Grid is about, and how did you come up with the idea in the first place? Because cowboys and dragons are that's pretty awesome.
So Dragon Grit is a fantasy western that takes place in a world where people ride dragons instead of horses, and it's about Vera, who is a former outlaw who takes on a risky escort job, um, essentially taking a city slicker across the wilderness while being pursued by a gang of outlaws. And um, this story was co-written by my wife and I, and my wife is a novelist. Her name's Lorelei Jonason, and originally we were going to write it as a novel, but basically early on in our relationship, we both were writers, and that was kind of something we bonded over, and we wanted to write a story together. And my favorite
Awesome.
genre of story to read is westerns. I love westerns. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour, and like my favorite movie is Tombstone. And then
Oh, I
she
freaking love Tombstone.
Tombstone's awesome. Um, and
Never,
she
I still
really
don't
liked,
understand to this day why Val Kilmer never won an Oscar for his role as Doc Holliday.
yeah, for sure. I agree. He's amazing in that movie.
Yeah,
Um, and so but my wife loves dragon rider stories and fantasy stories, and she's written a lot of fantasy, and she really likes that kind of thing. And so when I was thinking about like what kind of story could we write together, I was like, why don't we merge our two favorite things, um, dragons and westerns. And so kind of that's where it came from. And originally we were going to write a novel, and then we kind of like, because I've done a lot of comics, and we had some art commissioned of like sort of the main characters, and we were like, this would be really cool as a comic book.
for
And
sure.
I'm glad we went that direction, because people have been really responding positively to it.
That's cool. Now, with the art style, do you go with the same artist or do you go with someone different? Because, like you said, you fell in love with the Western comics, and sometimes it's great to find artists that could really capture that old time feel.
So this artist that I'm working with on this project, her name is Kay Woolheiser, and I had worked with her before last year on a project called The Knight and the Lion, which is a King Arthur story that I did.
Very cool.
I was yeah, and it's thank you, and it's about a knight and a lion, obviously, and they go on adventures, and she did such a good job on that, that I told her about this book, and she got really excited about it. And so this one is a little bit more of a commitment. Trying to find an artist to work with can be very difficult, and because they have to be passionate about the story, and they have to be available.
Oh,
And
yeah, especially if it's a long story.
Right. And so our plan for this book is actually 10 issues. We have it all written out. And it's essentially like we're adapting what was going to be a novel.
Mhm.
And like obviously like it's going to take a little bit of time to tell that whole story, but she was ready to, sign on for the whole thing. And so, it's definitely um finding the right artist is hard. In fact, for this project, we were looking for an artist for over a year. We've been trying to get this going for quite some time. And we hadn't considered Kay yet because she was still working on The Night and the Lion at that time.
Mhm.
Um, and uh, and so it wasn't that like artists were rejecting us necessarily. It
Okay.
was more that we needed to find that perfect person, because we didn't want to just do it with just any artist. Um, and as I've done more and
Oh,
more
of
comics, I
course.
get pickier and pickier about the artists. I want the right artist for the right project. And so, I um yeah, that's kind of I like when a series has the same artist too. I don't want like sometimes you got to switch artists, and when you're talking about like the big two, you're talking about Marvel and DC, they switch artists all the time. But if I can help it, I like to keep one artist on a book the whole time, just because it reads better that way.
Yeah,
Um
the capture that constant style.
mhm, yeah. And so
Yeah.
um
Yeah, she did a really good job with the artwork.
yeah.
And with the book and everything, you said you already got like 10 chapters written out and everything like that. Do you feel that after doing this project that you and your wife will do more, or have you guys done more together in the past?
This is our first project that we've done together. I will tell you that if we are able to successfully do all 10 issues,
Hmm.
um, even if we're very efficient about getting back on Kickstarter, and we're going to try to be on Kickstarter with this project 4 times a year if we can, but it will take us about 2.5 years to get this all done. And so it's a good question. I guess we'll see. If we haven't uh, gotten at each other's throats after 2.5 years of working on a story together.
Right,
But
right.
um, yeah, I mean, I expect if it works out, then we will do more stuff. And I also think that my wife is interested in doing comics of her own, which she's never done.
Very
But
cool.
certainly, if we get all 10 issues done, that'll be a great jumping off point for her to do her own stuff.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, it's always those things that I tell people or other people realize that sometimes as a comic book writer or artist, the best thing to do is work with other people. Like if you don't have a spouse to work with, try to get onto an anthology where you only have to do like a 10-page story, you know,
Hmm. Yeah, I will
because
say
you
that.
never know that you can't do it until you try.
Yeah, totally. I did, and when I was starting out, I did some anthologies, and I also ran a couple of anthologies, and then I also what's the word I'm looking for? At this point, I'm collaborating with like a lot of people, so not only like where I hire artists, but I have 2 books in the works right now that are co-creations with artists, and those were only able to happen because the work that I've done. Like I
Yeah,
kind of like put in the work and proved myself, and then people showed an interest in working with me, and so
yeah,
I've got
that's
a
what
few
it's all
different
about. It's
things.
about networking
Yeah,
and having stuff appear on time.
yeah, that's
Especially
right.
with Kickstarters. If you don't, like, fulfill your orders and do everything, like, people are gonna pick up on it. Like, I know some people, they're like, "Oh, I'll get my project done after I start the Kickstarter." I think people should have their project done or at least halfway done before they even do the Kickstarter because you don't know what's gonna happen, and artists could, like, bail out or something like that.
Yes, I will say that I have
Because
not
'Cause there's been a
always done
couple
that.
times where I've yeah. Mhm.
Um, Sorry, we're having like a little bit of a lag, but yes, I um I
Oh,
haven't
it's
always
alright.
had the book done when I launched, but
Mhm.
usually it's a lot better when it is. So for example, Dragon Grid is almost finished,
Yeah.
and then my next book that I'm launching after Dragon Grid is already 100% done. So it's like I like
Awesome.
doing that because you're right. Like there can be delays. I've definitely had that problem where I've had a book and I promised it by a certain date because the artist told me they could get it done by a certain time, and then delays happen. And then the other thing is that there's always going to be delays anyway because there's like so many factors. For example, I recently had a book that I was expecting to come in from a printer, and it was two
Mhm.
months delayed from the printer,
Oh, wow.
um, because they had issues. The printer that I went with, they had a bunch of issues,
Mhm.
and that I mean at that point it's like out of my hands. I was updating the backers as it happened, but it was like so if
Yeah.
so the fewer like delays you can get in there, the better for sure. Um, and so
Mhm.
uh, you know I but sometimes stuff just happens. Fortunately, I think I've been doing this for a while, and I'm very transparent with backers. Like I always update them about stuff, and
Yeah.
so the few times that I've gone past my expected delivery date, I always tell people what's going on, and everyone's always very understanding because everyone knows to a certain degree that Kickstarter is like very much a platform to help people make
Mhm.
things a reality, and that like that we don't necessarily have the resources of like a big corporation or whatever. you
Yeah.
know? And so sometimes when things happen, like, or I've had, especially like when the pandemic was really raging, there were definitely
Oh,
times
yeah.
that I where people would order books and they would come from overseas and they get stuck in customs or whatever for months.
Mhm.
And then it was like, well, what can you do? You just have to wait.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
So,
with the Dragon Grid and everything, like, your wife loves fantasy, you love Western. Like, when you guys were, like, sitting down and writing the whole thing, like, were you, like, going, like, in deep detail about how you want each character to look, or you gave, like, basically a rough draft and you let the artists, like, work their magic? Because sometimes, people have faith in the artist accomplish, or you have, like, a set image on, "This is what I want the person to look like, and I don't care about any other look."
yeah, I think we had a similar process to what I usually do with artists, which is that we had like a decent idea of what we thought those characters should look like, but we gave like a general description, but part of it is like the artist kind of discovering the characters too. Um
Yeah.
I think also it was very much like my wife had certain character Lorelai had certain characters that she were like very much her creations
Mhm.
that she put a lot into, and then I had characters that I really liked. I mean, I like all the characters, but for example, the main character Vera in the book is a character that my wife like very much. That's very much her character that she invented. And then the villain of the story, his
Gotcha.
name is Jack. And if you can imagine Johnny Ringo from Tombstone, but he rides a dragon, that's Jack.
Ooh,
And
that's
that
awesome.
was the character that I came up with. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
That'd be yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and again, it's a great idea. I love the whole concept of, like, and I don't know, just I feel throughout pop culture, westerns always work well when you mix it with, like, other franchises. You had sure, the movie to a lot of people was a flop, but Aliens versus Cowboys, that was a pretty interesting movie. I enjoyed it a
oh yeah.
lot.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I love cowboys, so
yeah. And I feel that just like how, you have horror comics and western and romance, they need to make a big comeback instead of just having, like, all of the comics be nothing but superheroes. Of course, you see more and more indie stuff, but the big top dogs, they're just mostly focused on the superhero stuff right now, and it's sad
that's true. Yeah, I
because
mean,
a lot of great Western stuff came out back in the 60s and whatnot. So, yeah,
the good news is that there's the independent comics, things like
exactly.
Kickstarter, like they put the power is totally in the hands of people who want to make stuff, and so
Hmm.
if you have a cool idea, you can do it on Kickstarter or self publishing, however you want to do it. I mean, everything involves risks, um, but I think that's what I love about Kickstarter. Some of my favorite comics ever are things that were kickstarted that never would have been approved by a traditional publisher, you know?
Oh,
So,
I definitely agree. You know,
mhm.
definitely agree. And with the dragons, I don't know if you guys want to go too much detail, but, like, are you just sticking to the the Western style dragons? Are you trying to, like, dab into, like, maybe down the road, like, some Chinese style dragons without the wings?
For right now, it's really kind of Western style dragons,
Okay,
and we did
gotcha.
talk a lot about what the dragons do, like how they behave, and so in a lot of dragon rider stories, dragons are like really hyper intelligent, and they can talk, or they can talk telepathically, or whatever. And in our story, they're a lot more like horses. Like they're more intelligent than horses, but not like a great magnitude more. They're like
Gotcha.
much more
So it's
like
nothing like
domesticated.
Dragonheart.
It's not like Dragonheart. No. It's they're like domesticated
Mhm.
beasts of burden essentially. So like So they can be smart, like though in the way a dog is smart,
Oh, yeah.
but but they don't talk and they don't have like a telepathic connection with their riders,
Mhm.
and so and that is we just kind of felt like the we wanted to do it like a little different than a lot of dragon stories, and also we wanted to preserve that like western,
Yeah.
like because like a lot of westerns, it's like about a man and his horse, right? Like that bond, and like in a western the man
Mhm.
doesn't have a telepathic like soul connection with the horse. It's just like
Oh, yeah, of course.
he's just trained the horse and they're loyal to each other and that kind of thing. So
Yeah. Now with the Western and everything, like, did you just want to have, like, a plane, like, just, out in the wilderness? Or was there, like, a city or state that you really wanna capture, like, the beauty of the whole great outdoors? Because, some people like to base their stuff off of Wyoming or Colorado just because it has, like, that feel to that type of, story that you wanna tell.
so I would say that it mainly takes place outdoors. The first issue um does introduce us to a city that's kind of in our world, that's like kind of on the edge of the civilized world, as it were.
Okay.
And it's kind of a growing, bustling city. But then they in issue 2 they set off on their adventure, out into the wilderness, and so
Mhm.
definitely like we've taken a lot of inspiration um from real settings like in
Yeah.
America, in the like so we've definitely got like different biomes we're going to explore, like plains and also like deserts. And in the first issue, in the preview pages, you can see like some mesas. And um and so it's like um kind of it's very much like a version, like a fantasy version of like the American West, except there's like some key differences, but yeah,
Gotcha.
and so we're gonna have eventually we're gonna get to a
Yeah.
point where we
Well,
we
it's
come to go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say because it's one of those things that especially like a comic like this, it's important to like have the environment be like a character too, because there's some
Oh yeah.
comics that you're mostly just focused on like the actual like people of the comic, but like Batman, Gotham is such a big character and a big part of that comic. It's I feel westerns, especially our fantasy comics, the world plays a big part on like why are people riding dragons instead of horses? Why is the world like this instead of being like the typical, modern world?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, for sure. There's definitely some stuff that you're gonna discover as the story goes on, that you're gonna kind of see, you know, um, um, kind of why the world is what it is, like sort of what's going on in the
Hmm.
world, how the dragons interact, and that we definitely have put a lot of thought into the world building. That's something that my wife is very good at, is like world building stuff. And we're gonna answer the questions of like where the dragons came from, and how domestication changes dragons, and like the
Yeah.
difference, sort of like the difference between dogs and wolves, like what's the difference between a wild dragon and a domestic one,
Hmm.
um and things like that. So um you know all of that will kind of be slowly revealed throughout the story.
Very cool. And with the whole Western thing, do you have like saloons and casinos basically give it like that old vibe as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, certainly in the city that the first issue takes place in, there's all that kind of stuff. It's not like definitely a big focus of the story though, because this is very definitely a travelogue
Hmm.
story. For the most part, it's going to be like sort of taking place in the wilderness. At one point, they're going to encounter a ghost town, and things like that. So there,
Oh,
those
nice.
things do exist, but they're not a huge focus of the story.
Okay, very cool, very cool. Well, we're 30 minutes in. I mean, you have anything else to talk about your comic? Because I didn't tell you, but usually at the end, like halfway through the show, I like to ask some questions because I think it's important for people to get to know the creators on like, you know, their likes and dislikes instead of just being a typical, interview show where you do nothing but talk about the comic and the Kickstarter, you
Sure.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I've talked about the comic plenty. If you're listening and you wanna check it out, and then search Dragon Grit on Kickstarter or go to dragongrit.com.
Which I had the Kickstarter in the description link. If anybody
Perfect.
needs to know, gonna whoever jumps on live or watches it afterwards. So, again, this is uh, we mostly talk about horror comics and fantasy comics. But if you had to pick, usually I don't ask the question, but what would be your favorite fantasy movie and favorite horror movie if you have one, and why? 'Cause
Yeah,
clearly
sure.
you wrote about, the unicorn, so you do like some type of horror from what I've seen.
Yeah. Um, as far as fantasy movies go, that's a very good question. I like a lot of fantasy movies, but, um, uh, I mean, so Lord of the Rings is something that, I had seen, like, once when I was younger, and then my wife is obsessed, so that's definitely something I've gotten a greater appreciation for since I've been married, um, is
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings is pretty good, and then, I think you can make an argument that Star Wars is a fantasy film, uh,
yeah.
I love Star Wars, and then when it comes to horror, that's a great question. I think that probably like if we're talking like recent horror movies, my favorite is A Quiet Place. Um, I really like that. And then going back a few years, it's almost more of a comedy than a horror movie, but The Cabin in the Woods I've always really enjoyed, just because it's sort of a send up of all those different horror movies. Um, but the one that sort of holds a special place in my heart, just because my younger brother insists on watching it every Christmas, is Krampus.
Alright, can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, froze again.
Alright. Technical difficulties. Alright. So, can you hear me still?
Yep.
Alright, awesome. Yeah, with, horror movies and everything, so what was the most recent one you said you really liked? A Quiet Place?
Uh, A Quiet Place is probably my favorite recent one, and then I really like The Cabin in the Woods, which is more of a comedy, really. Um, and then my brother's favorite is Krampus, and so he makes us watch
Hey,
that every
as
Christmas.
I that are yeah, yeah. Well, which is not wrong. I mean, it's actually funny. Me and another person that we've had on the show before, we did a Christmas specials where we talked about Gremlins and Krampus.
Yeah,
So
that's
Krampus
awesome.
is definitely a great like Christmas horror movie. It's definitely up
Mhm,
there.
mhm.
with all the toys and stuff like that. But yeah, with The Quiet Place, that's really great with the whole like trying to not make sounds and stuff like that. But was there like a horror movie that really piqued your interest as a kid? Like with me, it's more of a comedy, but I was always and still am a big fan of Killer Clowns from Outer Space, just
Oh
because
man.
the silliness of it.
When I was a kid, I hated horror movies and I was easily
Yeah.
scared. And when I was a kid, I don't know how when exactly this came out, but The Ring, the first one came out, and that movie gave me nightmares for so long. I was terrified of that
I had
movie.
the when did The Ring come out? I know I was a teenager when The Ring came out.
Let's see. I'll look it up. It 2002, so that I would have been 11. Um,
Oh yeah,
and
I was in high school.
okay, yeah, I was 11 and I should not have watched that movie. It
Yeah.
terrified me.
Yeah. But okay. So, with with that like since you weren't really big into horror movies, but did you ever have like a favorite slasher like Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers? Because a lot of people talk about their favorite superhero and who could kick whose butt, but I feel people could have the same conversation when it comes to you know, killers, slashers as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, maybe not as a kid, but certainly when I was a little older, because I went to film school, and the movie that I
Mhm.
really fell in
Awesome.
love with during that time was The Silence of the Lambs. Absolutely love, which is like
Oh yes.
it's more of like a psychological, thriller than a horror movie, if you wanna
Mhm.
split hairs, but, Hannibal, of course, is, like, a character that I really
Of
like.
course.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. As I said, not just like if you're trying to, make a horror movie, but even if you're making a horror comics, unlike things, usually have like a lot of subgenres. You don't have to be a creator who wants to write nothing but slashers. You could write a horror comic that's like, uh, a thriller, a noir, a sci-fi, a comedy, and that's what's beautiful about horror is that everyone has like their own type of subgenre that they really like. Because there are people that I know that won't watch a slasher, but they have no problem watching like Alien or Predator. That's like in that type of sci-fi horror element.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm into psychological thrillers, I think, definitely a lot more than horror movies,
Mhm.
but, like, I'm not, like, a big fan of just straight up, like, um classic horror movies, as much as there are some that I
Yeah.
like, but things that are more like along the lines of The Silence of the Lambs or, there's,
Mhm.
plenty of other movies like that that they're not, that are more like, like a suspenseful, like, um, you know, mystery and like sort of,
Well, yeah, of course, especially
yeah,
if it's grounded more in like the real world, because
uh-huh,
you could have a serial killer like Hannibal be real, so it's
yeah,
more of a like a terrifying thing because it's not like a gore factor, it's a factor that messes with your mind, and that's more of a serious tone.
yeah, yeah.
Now, let's see, what else I wanted to ask. Now, did you watch the TV series
Hannibal?
of Hannibal Lecter or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, oh, yeah. I watched that. I mean, that's the one with Mads Mikkelsen, as
mhm,
Hannibal, right? Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
definitely watched that.
Were
That
you
was a good one.
were you a fan of the show?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I thought it was pretty
Yeah,
good. I, I mean, you know, while it was on, I thought it was decent.
yeah.
Um, I
And
feel
with
like
the others
yeah,
go ahead,
go ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say with, the rest of the movies, like, the girl with, the dragon tattoo, I think that was the name. Like, do you feel like the other movies that came out later on were like taking away from Silence to the Lambs, or do you feel it was adding on? Because Silence to the Lambs is like golden. The other movies were great,
Y-
but I think that first one was like really, really something.
yeah. Well, um, yeah, I think it was good. The other ones are fine. I mean, the you also if you look at the novels that they're based on, really Silence of the Lambs is like
Mhm.
peak too. Like some weird stuff ends up happening with, Hannibal and uh I forget her name right now, the main detective.
Clarice,
Like Clarice. It really like kind of goes off the rails in some weird ways later on. And I kind of feel
yeah,
like sometimes you get authors where it's like once they have a success and then it like something really takes off, then they kind of like start to love the smell of their own farts so much that like they're not making sure that what they're writing is still good. Uh and
like
so,
with some of the
you know,
Star Wars movies. No.
yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Although I think that's more of a
Yeah.
corporate problem than it is like an
Oh,
individual
yeah,
artist problem. But I've definitely had some novels or like art like writers where I've read like I really liked a series and then I get to like the fifth book or whatever and I'm
yeah,
like, what the heck happened? Like this was like, I've had
yeah.
series that were like, this is my favorite series. And then I get to the last book in the series and it's trash. And I'm just like, oh man,
Or
that
even with
sucks.
TV series, where the
Oh
original
yeah.
writers leave the TV series halfway and the finales are just trash.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that can happen.
Now, you know, out of all that, do you ever had growing up or even now as an adult, do you have like your favorite Universal monster? Like, would you say Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, any of those characters? If you had a chance to like really write a story off of them, would you?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would totally write a Dracula story. I think that would be fun. Uh, yeah, I think probably Dracula is who I would write about. Because obviously I like
Yeah.
vampires. I wrote two different vampire series.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun. There was a Netflix show a few years ago, Dracula show, that was totally crazy.
Oh yeah, I
That
think I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, where it like starts out like way back in the 1600s or whatever, and then like Dracula gets like ends up getting like sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and then like in modern day London, he like crawls out of the ocean, and then like that the rest of the series takes place. It was wild. It was just like totally mind bending. Um, yeah.
Now, when it comes to vampires, like, are you big on like having the vampires just be completely terrifying, or do you try to get like that sex appeal, like they did with the '80s with the Lost Boys and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely my vampires are not like totally terrifying because um
Mhm.
I the in my detective series, I have a series called Vampire Detective in Space, and he is like the
Very cool.
last vampire in the galaxy, and he's definitely like a good guy vampire who only drinks synthetic blood because he doesn't like want to eat people. Um, and
Gotcha.
then um, and then in my other series, Unicorn Vampire Hunter, it's more of a fantasy thing, but the main vampire in the book definitely has like a redemption arc. So,
Very cool.
um, so it's like they can be scary, but I'm not. It's definitely not like the body horror type um of vampire. It's more it,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't quite say it's like Lost Boys either. I wouldn't say it's like sex appeal. Like they don't sparkle like in Twilight, but
Oh,
certainly they're
please God, no.
they're they're more. I think they're more complex. They have,
Gotcha.
they were I really hone in on like they were people and like what were they like as people and then how did that change when they
Oh
became
yeah, for
vampires.
sure. Yeah. Well, I love the whole idea with the unicorn vampire killer. It reminds me of that unicorn that killed the person in Cabin Fever or Cabin in the Woods. I mean,
Right, right, yes, yes.
yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're at the 45 mark. I think, you know, got a chance to really pick your mind about, what came up with the idea, some questions to ask. And again, Caleb, it was really cool to have you on. You are more than welcome to come on in the future to promote more stuff.
Okay.
And if your wife ever wants to come on, because you guys are, you're co-writers, so she's allowed to come on too. Or heck, even if you don't want to come on, I could get you on the show and we could just talk a whole episode about like Silence of the Lambs because what sometimes on the show we just like, shoot the breeze and talk about horror movies or suspenseful stuff.
Right on.
Because
Yeah,
we're
I
all because before being creators, we were all fans of like franchises. So
right.
get to geek
Right. That
out
would be
once in a
awesome.
while on the show. So
Well, thank you very much.
not a problem. Well, anybody who watches afterwards, thank you for watching and see y'all next time. All right. Doesn't want to close. There we go.
It looks like we're still alive.
I tell you, this StreamYard sometimes is
Oh, no, it's just me. All right. Well, thanks.